Epic Games has found themselves in an endless crunch period thanks to the success of Fortnite, the game that has adopted the games as a service model and of course is in early access, which means it already requires a bunch of updates, has found themselves having to overwork their workers by extraneous amounts to where people are working 70 to 100 hour work weeks and people are getting stressed and burnt out quite regularly. A lot of their contractors end up getting let go because their part of the job isn't done, even though they're working definitely over the time they're expected. And this is just in general not something that's specific to Epic Games. This is something that's going on with a lot of game companies at the moment, especially within the AAA industry, and it's kind of showing a lot of problems within the games as a service model, and it may not actually be sustainable. Michael here with another topic video. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance for me kind of being all over the place with this topic. There's a lot of facets within this topic that all kind of play into each other, and there's a lot of complex issues that kind of go into this, because the obvious, point that people can bring up immediately when you look at things like this and be like, oh, well, they're failing to meet expectations when certain things are going wrong and people aren't able to meet deadlines, you would automatically assume that, oh, maybe it's just management's fault. But there's actually a lot of issues here, and one of the normal issues that comes up is the idea of publishers pushing on things that just aren't possible within the time frame. And while that is definitely a valid argument, it's worth noting that Epic is not a publisher, they are a developer. They are themselves the ones that are putting themselves in this situation, and I guarantee they're doing everything they can to try and fix this issue, because unlike most companies like EA or Activision, whatever, they can't just cut off their development teams and be like, oh, well, there's no development team anymore, because they themselves are the development team, and this failure in general is going to negatively impact them as a developer in the long term. And if their company isn't viable in this situation, they could find themselves running into a hole to where they just no longer exist. And trust me, Epic doesn't necessarily want that. No matter how successful Fortnite has been, it will not be successful forever. And if they can't come out on top on this, they may not come out at all, which is just not a general good look for them. So the stakes are a little bit higher than when it comes to a company like EA kind of botching over BioWare when it comes down to the Anthem case, for example, to where there was an article recently released by Kotaku talking about how Anthem's development cycle was just a living hell because of a lot of management issues. And in this scenario, it still is a management issue, but it also comes down to the reliance on the games as a service model and how it just isn't feasible to actually deliver what gamers and companies expect out of this type of service. So first off, what is actually going on to kind of cover some of the actual wording and everything. Crunch period, if you don't know what a crunch period is, essentially it is overworking your workers and everyone in the creative field. Basically, it's a thing in all creative industries, not just the game industry itself. You see it in design industries, you see it in movie making, music, voice acting, etc., etc. It's in all creative industries, to where basically you end up putting in a lot of overtime near the end of a project cycle to actually meet some sort of deadline. And that sort of leads into the situation to where people are just massively overworked to just kind of get it done. Now, normally inside the industry, this isn't that big of an issue, and most of us have just kind of looked by it as just kind of a reality because, quite frankly, you can't rush creative work. You can't just be like, oh, well, tonight I'm going to finish this creative project. It just doesn't work that way. Quite frankly, when it comes down to a creative project, there's a lot of things that go into it, and good creative work takes time and passion, and you never necessarily know how long it's going to take. So no matter how many, people you have managing the project and how skillful they are, there's always unexpected results that are going to happen. You're going to run into unexpected results that are just going to take more time than you would ever imagine they would. And so there's always the kind of saying within the industry itself, within any creative industry, that if you think something's going to take 3 days, expect it to take 3 weeks. It's just, quite simply, things take a lot of time and you can't rush creative work. So what's the solution to that when you have a deadline? Is to just work more hours, which doesn't always work. There is diminishing returns on the amount of hours you put in, but that still ends up being the solution that a lot of companies end up taking because it's the only solution you can. Because if you end up trying to hire more people, there's not enough people that can actually take these creative jobs because, again, when you're talking about creative work, there's specific people that have to be on that creative front. You can't just be like, oh, well, we're just going to bring in this guy that was off the street and he'll be able to do it. That doesn't work because you need people who are creative to do creative work. So you run into a problem to where you can't just solve the problem by not having crunch period. So in general, crunch period is kind of unavoidable in a lot of cases. However, in this scenario, it's kind of the status quo, and it's becoming the status quo for a lot of companies within the industry, Epic included in this scenario. So what's happening with Epic is the fact that normally crunch periods are just at the end of a development cycle or before a major deadline. So for example, let's say it's a game is about to go to print for the CD and whatever. You're going to have a lot of crunch period during that time to try and get as much of the game done as possible. Now, currently in the current situation, we have, after launch patches and day one patches, etc., etc. Sure, people aren't fans of them, but again, you can end up having those to kind of fix your problems post-launch. And so you end up having the crunch period more closer to the kind of actual launch date, which is a good thing, but also not the best thing because you end up having 2 crunch periods instead of 1. But essentially, you end up having this crunch period during that time and period to where everyone's just kind of working their butts off to try and get the game finished as much as possible. Then you would also have crunch periods for like things like E3 demos or maybe large expansions for MMOs. The problem here, however, is that when you're talking about games as a service, the expectation is that the game is going to be constantly updated and constantly evolving and constantly changing. And this means that your updates aren't necessarily spread out, and the fact of this deadline never actually ends. So you finish, instead of, finishing off one of these, people have been able to actually overlook the idea of a crunch period in a lot of these development cycles because you're able to be like, oh, well, we had this one project, but we got it done, guys. And you're able to look at that product and be like, cool, we did it, that's what we aimed to do, and now we can go on and relax and usually have like a long type of break. Normally companies after a big crunch period would end up having a large break. The problem with this business model of games as a service is the fact that there is no break. You finish that one patch, you crunch for that patch, but then 2 weeks later you have another patch, and people are expecting that patch to have new content, new updates, and just new things to play through, and it's supposed to be at a finalized state. It can't be something that's kind of shoddy and put together because, as we've seen with games like Fortnite itself, even the community, if something comes out and it's not 100% foolproof, you end up seeing people raging and, expecting them to fix it immediately, which means you don't get that break. You don't get that resting period, which means that it is, as this article states from Polygon, by the way, I forgot to mention it was an article by Polygon. I'm trying to not mention Polygon because I'll talk about them in a second, but essentially Polygon, this has kind of been spurred off by an article by Polygon to where they're actually, looking at this and being like, okay, well, we have this patch out and we need to get this other patch out immediately. And we can't just sit there and do nothing because people expect the next update to be out there immediately. You can't say like, oh, we'll just, release it in the next patch in the next month. People complain, people leave, you end up losing popularity. And with Fortnite being as successful as it is, Epic doesn't necessarily want to lose that. And they can't necessarily lose that because if they lose it, they may not gain it back, especially with how competitive this industry has been with the games as a service model. We're already seeing how these failures can affect other projects such as Apex Legends, which has been having a massive fall off in popularity because of their update cycle. And Polygon itself, again, I'll talk about their article in a second because this isn't necessarily spurred off from them. This has been a discussion in the industry for a while now, and the talk about Epic overworking their workers has been a discussion for a while, but Polygon is kind of bringing it to the public eye, which is why I'm doing the video now, etc., etc. Anyways, even Polygon themselves, who is publishing an article talking about Epic overworking their workers to end up making this patch cycle possible, is also just recently released an article talking about Apex Legends having a ridiculous update model of having an update every month, saying that it takes too long for new updates and meaning that there's no content to play through, and them complaining constantly about games like this in general, not just Apex Legends. And we've actually seen a fall off on Apex Legends through both viewership on Twitch, player numbers on actual Origins. I don't know about console player numbers because they don't release those numbers, so I don't necessarily know if their player numbers have dropped on console, but on PC it has definitely dropped, and we're seeing a lot of interactions on things like Reddit and different types of forums to where basically they're just losing a lot of interest because they're not updating at a consistent rate, which means that Epic is under a lot of pressure to make sure that these updates actually stay up to date, because otherwise they could end up losing the space to a game like Apex Legends. And they're sort of forced to end up doing this sort of model because other companies are following this model. If they stop updating like this, then something like PUBG, for example, can end up overtaking the throne again, just for the simple fact that Fortnite just runs out of new content for people to play through. So they're sort of expected to have this sort of model to where they're just constantly releasing updates. Now, Polygon did release an article recently talking about this, as in the last few days, and for the most part, Polygon is not necessarily the most reliable source because for the most part, Polygon has a long history of just over-centralizing their sort of content and updates and articles and things and just lacking in general when it comes down to, just research in general. They're one of the companies that actually released an article talking about Cuphead and how it was a terrible game and how it wasn't designed properly when they just didn't even play the game. They've had multiple reviews and different topic articles talking about different subjects that they obviously never even researched, things that were obviously on like the front page of a website was never mentioned in the first place in many of these articles. If you want examples, just go ahead and look up why Polygon sucks and you'll find endless amounts of articles talking about Polygon and how their articles just in general are not good sources. However, it has been a talk within the development community, especially those within the sort of Unreal and Fortnite communities when it comes down to development, that Epic Games has been in this crunch period. So nothing in this article, which I will link in the description, as much as I hate to, I'm going to link it anyways. Nothing they actually stated inside this article is news to pretty much anyone actually inside these circles. And it is something that we've actually seen with other companies talking about these crunch cycles that we've been talking about for years and years, such as Rockstar when they were talking about it and gloating about how they had somebody working over 100 hours a week on their writing team. This was kind of met with a lot of negativity from the development teams because this has been in the discussion cycle and it actually falls directly in line with a lot of problems that we're seeing at Epic Games and things that ended up happening again with that Anthem article that released too recently as well. A lot of these issues were also apparent in that sort of cycle. So whether or not this was actually spurred on by them doing legitimate research or whether them just making assumptions or just looking at what the community was saying about Epic in general. So I can't rather say these accusations are actually true or not, unfortunately. But again, this is not news to the development teams and development kind of discussion boards and etc. This has been just kind of known information that we've been like, yeah, there's no way that Epic could end up keeping up this update schedule without overworking who they have. And we've always looked at it and being like, okay, working on Fortnite must be such a stressful situation just for the simple fact that making bi-weekly updates is not easy, especially when it has to be new content. Now, if you're just doing some minor patches here and there, you're just adding in some, small things here and there, it might be possible because you could probably look at it and be like, okay, cool, well, they're just modifying this number here and there, etc., while they're working on larger content. But to actually release new content consistently like Fortnite has done, it's just simply not possible with the size of Epic Games. And Epic Games, although they've actually increased their workforce by 3 times according to this article and according to other sources as well, that's not necessarily going to end up fixing the problem because, again, talking about the kind of creative works, you need specific people with creative talent to create creative work. And those people that you're bringing on won't necessarily have all the requirements that it has to take or that it takes to actually make this sort of stuff happen. And you also got to train all those people to work in things like Unreal Engine. You can't necessarily say that everyone's going to be working in Unreal Engine, and we can't necessarily say everyone's going to be familiar because every single development team is different. This means that you have to train everyone to work in the ways that development studio does. And while Epic Games is quite open about the way that they work, there's still a lot of inner workings and a lot of things that you have to get used to when you move into a new system, especially when it comes down to creative works. And this is true of any job, and it's even more exaggerated because it is a creative job and it is a creative industry to where you actually have to have that creative talent to go into it in the first place. Now, where does this actually come into Epic's play style, and where does this actually, have a negative effect, and why do people care, quite frankly? Because in the general sense, you don't hear about this type of discussion inside the major gaming circles because, quite frankly, we've built a culture, unfortunately, that's just kind of negative towards developers. We're seeing this a lot, especially when it talks about Epic Games and the Epic Game Store, for example. We're seeing a lot of negativity towards developers when they decide to ditch Steam because Steam has been a known tragedy place for developers. It's just an absolutely toxic place to be. And being on Steam is a nightmare for a number of developers. And if you want sources on that, seriously, just do a simple look. Look at my Twitter feed, for example, and actually look at some of the developers that I follow. They have nightmare stories about working with Steam. And I personally hate working with Steam in general, even as somebody who hasn't been able to release a commercial product quite yet, working with several different studios and working with several different groups, trying to release things on Steam in the first place and trying to help people with those issues. It's a nightmare, and the community when it comes down to Steam is just abysmal. And this comes into play in just all gaming spaces in general. We just have a general lack of respect for our developers. And this ends up leading to this expectation that developers just don't really matter. And companies have kind of adopted this take as well when it comes down to contract work and who you can actually have in your production teams. This sort of misrepresentation of developers has led to unreasonable expectations of development studios, which means that Epic Games is being expected to produce something that is not possible to produce within reasonable expectation. You can't look at a development studio that had only 400 workers and say, okay, now produce this thing that literally no other company is capable of producing. Even studios of 3,000 people are incapable of producing this much content. Now create that much content while also not exploiting your employees. Now, to be fair, Epic Games does say they're trying to solve these problems, and I definitely don't doubt them trying to solve these problems. Epic Games has a long history of being a great place for people to work, and so they definitely don't want to lose their reputation with that, and a lot of people at Epic Games still report it as an awesome place to work. However, production teams, QA teams, and all these other supposedly non-critical aspects of the game development where basically people can be replaced on a whim just because they want to, have led into the situation to where that necessarily isn't the case anymore, to where they're actually running into the same types of issues they would run into other companies because Epic Games is just growing at such a rapid rate and they're unable to keep up. So while people in the actual creative portions of this aspect, and no, I'm not saying production teams aren't creative, but I'm saying the people that are actually like making the design decisions, et cetera, may be safe and may be able to get that nice, older sort of respect from Epic that they were expecting from before. The people in the production teams that can easily be replaced by a bunch of younger, more zealous kind of creators that haven't been exposed to the industry long enough, that are kind of very susceptible to this sort of exploitation, are being exploited to degrees that are just unhealthy and unreasonable. And the reason why people in the industry care is because it's running into a situation to where we're no longer having people enter the industry. We're having a lot of people leaving the industry. And as Epic Games is finding out, they can't find enough actual high talented creatives to stay inside that sort of crunch period because, quite frankly, it's not healthy. And the problem with, and the reason why people actually hate the idea of crunch period, is it actually negatively affects your health and your social life. And it can be devastating. It can actually burn you out of the creative industry itself and make you never want to work on a game again. But it can also lead to actual health issues. It can lead to a bunch of mental health issues as well as physical issues. Losing things like sleep can end up actually negatively affecting your health in a lot of different ways. It can lead to a bunch of literal vomiting. It can lead to a lot of other sort of things. I'm trying to think of the long list of things, and I actually don't have the source up at the moment, and I should have because I would have been reading them off at the moment. But in general, it's just not a good thing. You can just look up the negative effects of losing sleep alone, and that can end up being enough to convince you that crunch time isn't a good idea, because when you're working these large amount of hours, you get very little time to go home and rest and to relax. And there's a lot of things talking about therapy and having to go into therapy after these large crunch periods, and sometimes that doesn't even end up helping, and it can negatively affect your life in a lot of different ways. And that's not even covering the social aspects of you're away from your family and friends for long periods of time. What happens when you get disconnected from that? A lot of negative things end up happening when that ends up happening. And it's just one of those things that ends up kind of just building on top of itself with a lot of different issues, and crunch periods in general just end up having a negative effect on the industry as a whole because it burns people out, and then you lose creative talent, and that creative talent ends up leaving the industry forever. We have several articles coming up about different sort of leading members of these different teams just kind of leaving video games forever and never coming back because it ends up being such a stressful environment in a lot of different ways, and having crunch periods definitely doesn't help with that stressful environment. And so when it comes down to it, that's the reason why people care. And obviously, it's not good to exploit your employees in the first place. That's never something that's good in any sort of industry, especially the game industry. If you care about the game industry itself, not only do you have all those issues that I was just talking about to where creative industry is just running out of creatives because they're getting burnt out, you also have to worry about them just exploiting people like any other industry. For example, I have experience in the restaurant industry that is notorious for this in my area, to where basically if you're not doing the work and you're not working overtime, you'll get laid off, quite frankly. You'll just be replaced by somebody else who's do the work without complaining. And then eventually they'll end up complaining, and then they'll just get replaced as well because there's so many people looking to replace that position. And so what Epic Games is finding themselves in is they're in a constant struggle to where they're trying to hire enough people to deliver something that is absolutely impossible. I didn't save enough people. Whoops. I wasn't paying attention, to be honest. I'm just playing it in the background to play it in the background. But they're in this constant struggle to where they're trying to hire enough people to deliver this product that's literally impossible to achieve, while also trying to kind of make up for that. And how do you make up for that? You have the people that you have work the amount of hours that those people that you would normally be hiring would end up filling, which just doesn't work because now you're working those people to the point of, exhaustion. Then they end up leaving, and then you have to hire more people that you can't fill in. And then you don't have people to end up hiring to actually like train and stuff like that, because then you run into a situation to where all of your higher ups end up leaving, such as the BioWare situation that's going on right now, to where all the experience has left the company. So now who's going to hire the new hirelings? Absolutely nobody. And you could say like, oh, well, Epic could just end up going in and just hiring a bunch of freelancers like a lot of other companies do, such as Riot Games. And the problem with that is that the more people you hire at once, the more you have to train, and training takes time, which means that hiring more people also isn't a solution. So the reality is that Epic Games is kind of in a situation now, and a lot of companies that are trying this games as a service model, or live services, or whatever you want to end up calling it, or whatever the industry ends up calling it tomorrow, because of course they're coming up with new terms to call this thing, because as it gets negative light in the press, they obviously want to change that. The general idea is that they're in an unwinnable situation to where this is not a sustainable model, and they're running into a situation to where they kind of have to exploit what they have to end up delivering this product that they have promised. Now, the obvious solution to this is honestly, just in general, a little bit more respect for literally everyone in the situation. If everyone in the industry looked at this and been like, okay, cool. If gamers were like respectful and they were like, hey, okay, we understand that this gun broke in this patch or whatever. Maybe we can wait 1 or 2 patches and we can wait a month for this to be fixed. This wouldn't be an issue whatsoever. And the way to end up fixing that is changing the culture itself. And again, this culture has been kind of ingrained inside the game industry itself, to where we've actually taken pride in the idea of crunch periods and the idea of just stretching out to end up getting this awesome product out there. And it's always been celebrated as this kind of achievement, because we end up pushing out a finalized product that we're so excited for. We're just like, yes, we got it done. Guys, look at it. It's incredible. We took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort and it was stressful, but we did it. But the idea with the live service is that you don't have an end. And that's the major issue here, is there's no end to this. As in, there is no achievement. There is no, hey, we got this patch out and it's great, guys. There's always the next patch. There's always the looking at it. And so what needs to happen is the entire cultural change in the way that we respect our developers needs to completely change. We need to look at developers and be like, okay, we can't be overworking. Companies need to be willing to be like, hey, guys, we respect our employees enough that we're going to push back these updates because we need to delay them, because we just simply don't have the workforce to deliver what you guys want. And actual gamers themselves need to be respectful towards developers enough to say, okay, cool, we can wait for that. But what also needs to happen is everyone involved needs to do this at the same time, because if they don't, then someone overthrows this. So for example, if Epic Games decided to do this, for example, and this is one of the reasons why they're stuck. Now, I'm not going to praise Epic Games. I'm still upset at Epic Games for doing this, and I have been for a while. And I've talked about it several periods of times over and over again in videos over the last year since Fortnite has been a success, quite frankly. I have talked about Fortnite being a dangerous situation, and I've been praising them for the fact that they're able to push out updates, because it's actually incredible. But it also comes at a cost, and it always comes at a cost. And the cost is, if they don't deliver this, somebody else will overthrow them. We've seen other success stories such as Apex Legends come out, to where, yes, Apex Legends is now falling off, but what if Fortnite wasn't there to hold its ground? What if Fortnite wasn't there to end up picking up where Apex Legends, wow, I said Epic instead of Apex, that's a tongue twister. What if Fortnite wasn't releasing updates to end up updating themselves to make it so that there was competition for Apex Legends? It's possible that Apex Legends would have overtaken Fortnite and just run away with it. And it's possible that somebody else could end up going into the scene and be like, hey, you know, Fortnite, it doesn't have an update for a month. We're going to release in the middle of that, and we're going to have updates and new content and a new idea. And somebody else will end up pushing for this kind of model. And in general, that just leads to a general kind of negative attitude towards the entire development cycle. And it's just a bunch of disrespect towards developers and people working in general, which is just a problem within the industry as a whole. You can look at many different assets of it, or aspects of the game industry, and that's actually what it comes down to, is just a lack of respect for developers and the workforce. Now, some people have stated some things that could end up helping with this, such as the idea of developers kind of unionizing and having the idea of just developers having a union to kind of make it so they could kind of have to force companies to end up respecting them and such. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole depth of the problems with unionization inside the creative industry. You can already look at several other creative industries for the negative effects of this, such as the voice acting communities end up having huge issues when it comes down to different unions, because in order to enact the sort of pressure that a union has, they have to have restrictions, they have to have, you know, the follower numbers, and they have to do a lot of different things. So for example, in the voice acting industry, a lot of unions and such, as in, you know, the major ones, of course, you can't hire people that aren't in a union. when you're working on a project if you want to use somebody from the union, which means that you either hire everyone from the union or you don't at all, which means that it kind of limits the people that you can accept, and it also limits the work for the people in the union, and there's a lot of negative effects to that. Companies could also just outright say, okay, we're not going to hire anybody that's in a union. Then suddenly, struggling artist or production artist or something is already struggling to find work, and now that they're in a union, nobody's going to hire them. And that's easily could happen considering the number of people that are in the industry right now that want to get into it. And that's another issue with it, is there's a lot of people that are very zealous about getting into the game industry. And while we're lacking in those higher creatives, there's a lot of people that are willing to go into the grunt work of production work, which is mostly where all this overtime ends up coming into play. And they're willing to like fill in those slots, and it's kind of disheartening a little bit. I mean, I would admit, if I could end up working at a place like Epic Games and end up working as a production artist for like a week or two, hell yeah, that'd be a hell of a week, but it would be worth the money. They're getting paid a lot for that overtime. And I understand that that's not good. And that's one of the reasons why this unionization also won't work, is the idea if you want the unions to kind of gather together and actually force these developers or these development companies to end up actually enforcing good labor laws and et cetera, everyone has to play into it. You can't just be like, oh, well, there's going to be this small offset of people. They just won't hire those people. Done. That means that in order for them to actually enforce those type of rulings, everyone has to do into it. Now, a better solution is if every single developer and production artist just said, okay, cool, we're not working this much overtime anymore, and we're done. And everyone globally just said, nope, we're not doing it anymore, because this is a national problem. It's a problem inside every single industry, especially in Japan. Japan has some huge horror stories when it comes down to this sort of thing, to where people are working 100-hour work weeks every single week. And Japan in general has, just a work culture issue, to be honest. But in the UK, they also have these sort of issues, and they don't actually have a lot of laws to prevent it either, to where the US have some laws. They get around it in the US with a lot of things like contractor works and things like that, and that's another reason why unionization won't actually work either, is because they can end up having it so that it's like, oh hey, well, we're just going to end up using contractors now, and they won't actually hire people as a workforce. And so yeah, it's just, in general, there's so many issues that come into play, and the actual solution to it is for everyone to simultaneously change the culture that comes around to actually respecting our developers, and that just simply isn't going to happen. So what's going to end up happening to Epic Games in the end of all this? Well, quite frankly, either they're going to keep it up and actually manage to figure out a way around it, and they're going to achieve the impossible, or they're going to eventually have a crash to where they're going to run out of people to hire, and eventually Fortnite will slow down and Fortnite will die. And I think Epic kind of knows this. Epic Games is not just developing Fortnite. For as much as people love to believe they're just developing Fortnite, they actually have other games in their project, and they do develop the awesome Unreal Engine 4, which, for as much as Epic has done negative things recently, the Unreal Engine 4 is still an absolutely amazing engine. It's actually been a positive force within the game industry, and Unreal itself has been a positive force, as it's also going to now include a bunch of different APIs that can be used not just by Unreal Engine, but other things. And Epic Games has been pushing for a lot of positive things for developers in the process. It's just that Fortnite itself has been proven to just be unsustainable in its games as a service model. And I don't think that is necessarily a problem with Epic Games itself. I think Epic Games is at its leg here, at a limb, to where it's just like, we don't know what to do and we don't know how to solve this problem. So they've kind of just gone with the standard status quo of what developers have been doing for the past over a decade, quite frankly. The idea of, oh, we don't have enough time to finish this, the idea has always been to just crunch what we have. But the idea hasn't been evolved to the point of accepting games as a service models and early access titles that are up to the public. And it just leads to the situation. That's a cool dinosaur. I'm going to go destroy it with my pickaxe. And it leads to the situation to where they just don't know what to do and they can't really solve the problem. And so I kind of sympathize with companies like Epic Games or, BioWare specifically when it actually comes down to these situations, because quite frankly, I wanted to climb on top of it to get the teddy bear, and that didn't happen. So I kind of sympathize with these companies trying to end up solving this problem, because it really is just an unsolvable problem, and it's something that the old business models don't really work. So to the best of luck, because Epic Games, for as much as people love to hate on it right now for the popularity of Fortnite and because they've been doing the whole exclusive thing with the whole storefront, which I'll do a whole video on them eventually. I meant to do it forever ago, but things kept coming up about it, and I'm never sure exactly what to say on it because there's a lot of different facets like this video, which ended up being 30 minutes long. I apologize for that. But these sort of situations are very, very complex. And I actually wish the best of luck to Epic Games and hope that they can end up solving this problem. It really sucks that they've kind of been deduced to embracing this whole crunch culture, as we've ended up calling it. And it kind of sucks that Fortnite itself has been such a huge success that it has actually had a negative impact on Fortnite and its developers in general. Because again, Epic has been known to be a positive force for development studios, and we still end up seeing this with a lot of their projects. And so it's not like Epic doesn't care about their developers at all. It's just that they're trying to solve an unsolvable problem that's kind of bringing them to the point to where now they kind of have to be disrespectful to their developers. And to be fair, no, they don't. They could just let Fortnite fail, but they have things they want to achieve, and you know, in reality, the executives could just look at it and be like, oh, well, the only people we're hurting is not the true creatives, we're just hurting the production teams, which again just results in that whole lack of respect for the creative industry in general, which is a problem in every creative industry and stretches far beyond just the idea of crunch period and production teams. So in general, the solution to this is to just have more respect. If you want to actually be a pushing positive force in this industry for everyone, then just start having more respect for developers. Start remembering developers and developer names. Start actually, you know, understanding when things go wrong that it's not necessarily their fault and they're doing everything they can. Because trust me, people that are working in this industry, we care a lot about what we produce. We don't, you know, make video games if we didn't enjoy it, if we didn't want to actually make video games and make things that people enjoy, and if we didn't have a passion for it, we wouldn't be in this industry. And that's one of the things to really keep in mind. If you wanted to be in the game industry, for example, if you wanted to be just a programmer, software engineering and the tech industry in general is lacking people, which means that I could make a hell of a lot more money if I wanted to go into the tech industry and I just wanted to work for a tech company. That's a hell of a lot better. And a lot of these other people that are going into the game industry, especially for things like Epic Games and stuff, they could easily go into the tech industry and just make more money. It's not about money. It's about loving the idea of making video games. And so if you want to be a pushing force, make sure to be understanding and be respectful to your developers and et cetera, and your fellow companies and such. And be respectful to your fellow gamers as well. You know what? In general, just be a respectful person to anyone and everyone, and eventually we'll solve this problem. And I think, oh wait, there's a story thing going on? What did I do? I hate talking. Oh no. But yeah, in general, just be more respectful, and eventually, hopefully, the games as a service model kind of dies. I really hate it, especially as somebody who wants to get into the game industry a lot. I'm personally working on a bunch of indie projects right now, and so I've got some stuff that I can't really talk about too much that I'm working on. I know some people know that I'm working on like a rhythm game, and I am working on an RPG, and so people know that I'm working on those. I just can't talk too much about them, but I do have a rhythm game demo coming out soon. I'm so excited for it! But yeah, so again, generally speaking, just be more respectful and be understanding, and hopefully this games as a service model ends up dying because it's just a disrespectful model in general and doesn't allow creatives enough time to actually create a decent product. And if we don't have enough examples, with this being an example of Fortnite and how they're having to treat their developers to keep it up and doing well, and if we don't have the other extreme to where basically ends up creating a product that's absolute dog poop, which is freaking the Anthem example, then yeah, quite frankly, we're kind of stuck with, if you can't actually see through that and be like, okay, cool, maybe this model doesn't work, then I don't know. We're in for a world of hurt within the game industry, which has been kind of a building theme for quite a few years now. So yeah, we might just be screwed. We don't necessarily know. So hopefully they can work through this, and hopefully they can find ways to actually, you know, hire more people and get these people on. And hopefully this is a problem that ends up going away as they end up training their new hirees, if they don't end up losing everyone because the crunch is just unbearable. So yeah, I feel bad for all those developers, and I hope that, you know, they're able to kind of stand up for themselves, because quite frankly, the article actually goes into this, but the idea is if they're not working overtime and they're not working this crunch, then they just end up getting fired, quite frankly, because they just end up getting replaced, which isn't good in general. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this one. Sorry this one was a little bit longer. Of course, you can leave your thoughts and comments below in the comments section. If you like my styles of content, you want to find out more about my game development stuff, etc., I'm currently working on a blog post, so we'll have something new up eventually, as in I'm trying to finish one of the mechanics in my rhythm game before I end up making the post, because it has it in there. Yeah, you can end up checking out my website at michaelpstanich.com, link in the description, as well as a link to our gaming Discord called The Broken Chat Box. I am now starting to post the whole news articles that I end up seeing around and stuff like that, so if you want to be consistent in the news and end up seeing stuff that I'm seeing, you can end up looking up there and maybe get a sneak peek to future videos that I'll end up doing and stuff like that. And I also have a link to all my stuff, so if you end up not getting the notification through YouTube like everyone else, then yeah, that's a great place to follow. Also, you can end up talking about, I don't know, video games and stuff like that. And if you want to play Fortnite, I have a friend who's addicted to Fortnite, so he will most likely message you beforehand if he sees you're playing Fortnite. So go ahead and join there and just be like, "Hey guys, want to play some Fortnite?" And he'll be like, "Hell yes, I'll join you in Fortnite." He doesn't really necessarily care about all the drama that's happening with Epic right now, so yeah, he'll play Fortnite undiscretionably. So yeah. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And remember, keep it respectful, guys. Just be respectful in general, and then we can all be happy. That's really all we want. We just want to create good stuff. That's all us artists want to do. We just want to create awesome stuff for people to play video games and have fun. And instead what we get is 80-hour work weeks and ridiculous work schedules that are just impossible to keep up with. So, yeah, hopefully we all don't burn out before the end of all this, because that'd be unfortunate to have no more video games.